Yeah.
All right, so my apologies. I didn't send you an updated schedule.
No, it's all good. So we wanted to. What all did we want to talk about?
Let's see. Let me write it down just so I know at least. All right. Well, did anything interesting or of note happen on this last week's UFC card? Cannot for the life of me.
Wait, the one we just watched?
Yeah. Was there some kind of deep-seated rivalry that was settled, or?
Not to my knowledge. Is there something in particular you're talking about here? Was it that rollicking Charles Byrd versus John Phillips rivalry that needed to be settled?
It was a rollicking good time, wasn't it, old chap?
Ahem.
I enjoyed it. Clearing our throats back and forth. Hey, you know what? The one thing none of us saw coming, that was a fun-ass fucking fight.
It was really fun.
I'm
not mad at being wrong about that.
Oh, I didn't even pick Blachowicz to win. I just thought he would be more competitive than last time.
After all of that, you didn't actually pick him to win?
No, I just What? Why are you mad at me? You're the one who got set off when I said, I think he'll make it more competitive than last time. That's all I said.
Oh my god. I can't believe this.
Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, the extremely correct Connor Ruebusch, and with me is my beloved co-host, whom I will graciously allow to be heard on this episode, even after last week's fiasco, even after the blood-soaked battle, the online blood-soaked battle of the weekend. Here's Dr. Patrick Wyman. Pat, you don't feel too ashamed to let your voice be heard on this show, do you?
I feel a slight sense of shame, but as with all of my senses of shame, it's fleeting.
like when you killed those animals as a child, and the shame was there, but really it was just kind of on the surface, and eventually it was gone.
Yeah, no, very, very quickly. Very quickly. Yeah. I am interested to see how, I don't know. I'm not interested at all. Nothing about this interests me. Yeah. The only thing that interests me is the rubber match. Yeah. I cannot wait for that third fight between Jimmy Manuwa and Jan Blachowicz.
Yes, it's suddenly a series that we are all desperately interested in. In case you don't know what we're talking about, we are referring to last week's episode in which we very heatedly previewed Manuwa versus Blachowicz, came away with some strongly differing opinions, but we are not going to talk about the results of that fight just yet. That was the co-main event. And as per usual, we are going to start with the main event of last weekend's card. That would be UFC London. And the main event, of course, was a heavyweight showdown between perennial top contender Fabricio Werdum, although the result of the fight suggests that maybe that perennial time at the top is finally coming to an end, versus Alexander Drago Volkov, a very tall guy who, unlike Stefan Struve, kind of knows how to fight like a tall guy. We're going to talk about the rest of this card as well, get to some questions from our listeners at the end of the show, but let's jump in, Pat, on the main event, Werdum versus Volkov. It was looking pretty good for Werdum early, and then the wheels began to fall off. What was your overall read on this matchup?
We talked in our preview of this episode about whether Werdum was declining, when he was going to decline, how we've kind of gone back and forth looking at his last few fights, saying he looked pretty good in this one, he looked not so good in that one. When is the decline going to come? The decline is here. There's no way of looking at Werdum in this fight and comparing it to anything that he's done in the last few years and saying, like, yeah, no, this is the same dude. Even the Overeem fight from last year, which was slow paced, he didn't look great. But after he rebounded after that, he looked more or less like himself in his two subsequent fights. Mm-hmm. This one shows that there's a trend here. Like, he may have gotten himself into great shape for that Tabora fight, but this guy, I think we're going to see more of this Werdum than any other moving forward. I don't think it's going to be possible for him to get himself into the kind of shape that he was for that Tabora fight.
Yeah, even if it is largely mental. I mean, he's in his 40s now, so it's got to be at least in part physical, the decline. But even if it's largely just that he's not really interested in getting himself in shape for fights as frequently anymore, that's still a marked change. That is still a change for a guy who, for most of his most impressive wins, really relied on his stamina and has really faltered whenever his stamina has failed him. You know, it's like, that's kind of a keystone of his game.
Well, that's a really, really excellent point. I hadn't quite thought about it that way, but everything, when Werdum is successful, it's because he has the gas tank to fight 5 hard rounds. When Werdum hasn't been successful, it's because he hasn't had the gas tank to fight even 3 hard rounds.
Yep.
And as you get older, your margin for physical error gets smaller. Injuries that may have been kind of nagging when you were 30 are more or less debilitating when you're 40. Whether it's a back thing that makes it hard to run, or you've got like a knee injury or an ankle, or you've busted a toe, or any one of these things, like it's just much, much harder to get yourself into the kind of shape you need to be to do that when you're 40 than it is when you're 30, or even 35. And like all it takes is one kind of tiny little tweak that keeps you from doing road work for a week, and suddenly your cardio's gone to hell. Like you just do not have the margin for error. And it seemed fairly clear that Werdum was just not in good physical condition for this.
Yeah, pretty much. The fight played out. Well, Werdum went for his wrestling very, very early. We were a little concerned about whether or not he would shoot for the takedowns. He was hitting a head outside singles from the very beginning, and we can talk about what that says about Volkov's takedown defense and what that says about his chances against the elite of the rest of this division, that he was taken down so easily and so frequently early on in the fight. But Werdum began to fade. I think you could tell that. I mean, I don't think it was entirely physical. I think it was also that he was starting to be bullied, maybe even bullying himself a bit. That's kind of what I think happens a lot with fighters that strike you as bullies, is that insecurity or whatever that causes them to need to assert themselves in that way over other fighters. That's the thing that comes back and bites them when it's turned around. And I think we've seen that out of Werdum a few times. We have seen, like in the first Overeem fight, a very good example of seeing him in a matchup that he definitely could have won, if not for the fact that the other guy bullied him and made Werdum kind of lose his cool and not fight the way he should have fought. And this fight was pretty similar to that, I think. Very different in the pacing and how it played out, but there were moments in the third round you started to see Werdum really going desperately for takedowns. You started to see him get
going
dropped.
For that deep half.
Yes.
Going for that deep half sweep.
Beginning to settle for the idea of playing off of his back if he couldn't get the takedown. And Volkov did his best to punctuate all of that slow downward trend with a lot of like very pointed humiliation. Dropping Werdum on his back and just casually waving him up to his feet, like just shaking his head at things. He was really, I think, doing a lot of posturing. And I don't know if it was deliberate or not based on who he was fighting, but I think that was a big part of why Werdum, as he always does when he collapsed so catastrophically there at the end, where it was like one last desperate scramble on the ground, and then he just came up and swung for the fences just like he did against Miocic and got knocked out cold.
Yeah, these are both pretty crafty guys, And in fact, you could make a good case that Werdum's entire late career success has been a product of that craftiness.
Sure.
That the entire game for him is mental, far more than it is physical. He has been a good enough athlete with a great chin and a good kind of well-rounded depth of skill, but really his game is all about durability, pace, and his ability to outthink his opponent both tactically and strategically, right? To put fights in positions that favor him over the long run, and just to eke out rounds where he needs to hit takedowns where he needs to force his opponent into making mistakes. That's really been Werdum's game. Volkov is pretty fucking crafty himself. He did not get, and I think maybe he knew this from having sparred Werdum repeatedly to get when he was getting Werdum ready for that first Travis Brown fight. Like, these guys know each other. Volkov is not a man who gets intimidated. I would imagine he was probably familiar with the kinds of head games that Werdum likes to play.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and he was able to engage him on that level, and you could tell that Volkov's whole thing was just that he didn't panic. He didn't get himself into a space where he was desperately trying to escape. On the ground, that was what was really striking to me about the way that Volkov handled this. Was he was fine. He's just like, okay, he's going to get me down. I'm just going to try to not let him pass. I'm not going to panic, try to get back to my feet and give him an opening to get to my back or snag my neck with a guillotine. It's just like, I will ride this out for as long as possible because I think my gas tank is going to hold up longer than his is, and I don't think he can seriously hurt me inside my guard. And like, that was a strategic calculation that he made.
Absolutely,
and he stuck to it. I thought it was really smart.
Yeah, a strong gambit from Volkov, and I don't know if he may have lost the first 3 rounds of this fight. Third round, I think, might have gone his way. I think he knocked Werdum down in that round, or at least hurt him. But the momentum was definitely not on his side after the first couple of rounds. But I'm glad you pointed out that closed guard. Like, I was thinking of it watching it live as a bad thing. Like, oh, he's stuck in this closed guard. Whenever he's taken down, he's stuck here because he can't open his legs for fear that Werdum will instantly pass and he'll be in serious trouble. So he was just stuck in this useless closed guard that he could not. He couldn't take the risk of doing anything with it, a position that already doesn't lend itself to a whole lot. But like, if you think about the fight as a whole, that makes perfect sense. It's a little heavyweight, it's a little Derek Lewis-y, where it's like at heavyweight, yeah, we can afford to throw away rounds in ways that fighters in lower divisions probably wouldn't get away with. But it was a good decision. And it kept Volkov in this nice, calm headspace where he was just riding it out. He was just waiting for his time to come. Meanwhile, Werdum, I think, was getting frustrated that his time wasn't over yet, that he hadn't already gotten Volkov out of there. And, yeah, I don't know. A nice performance from Volkov, very cold, very calm, kind of scary. How about the takedown defense? How do you think he stacks up against the rest of this division? Now he's like certifiably a top 5 UFC heavyweight. What are his chances?
I mean, I think that's kind of where this falls apart, I think. Because Werdum is a passable to good takedown artist. And in this fight, I thought his takedowns were actually pretty dang good. But he's, Verdum's the kind of guy whose baseline level of skill is on his takedowns is going to depend on how much he actually did in that camp. You can tell what camps when Werdum has worked his wrestling and camps when he has not. It's very kind of straightforward there. But like, his baseline level of skill is mediocre, and that means his takedowns range from mediocre to pretty decent. But like, Stipe Miocic's baseline level of wrestling, whether or not he's doing a lot of drilling of his game that camp, is going to be very good. Yeah. Stipe isn't going to get tired hitting snatch singles, which is the takedown that Werdum hit over and over again here. Stipe isn't going to get tired hitting a snatch single and running the pipe. Like, that's not going to wear him out. He can do that for 5 rounds and just lay on top of you. And he can do a lot more damage from top position inside your guard than Werdum can. Daniel Cormier, like, obviously, if he beats Miocic and sticks around at heavyweight and they're looking for a challenger and they put Volkov in there with him, I think that fight would just be single leg lift after single leg lift, over and over and over again. But against Werdum, that strategy was good enough. And maybe it's possible that Volkov's takedown defense and his distance management could continue to get better. He's only been fighting as a pro for, I guess, only 9 years. So he is kind of in the late stages of his prime. But at heavyweight, the late stages of your prime can stretch on forever into the sunset.
He's 29, so he's a very experienced child in this division. he seriously has, he's very durable. His durability has held up to this point. Doesn't seem like there are any issues there. He's well conditioned. Seems like he takes care of himself between camps. Always comes in good shape. I would expect a pretty good long late career here from a guy like Volkov. The question is, how much better can that takedown defense get to stack up to somebody like Miocic, because we're not just talking about Volkov versus the rest of the heavyweight division. We're talking about the fight that he himself called out, and justifiably so, after the win, which is Stipe Miocic. And I it's hard to like the looks of that matchup if you're thinking from Drago's perspective.
Yeah, I think especially because of how good Miocic is as a striker too, and as a long distance striker. Like, I think Volkov would have trouble sticking Miocic outside and limiting his opportunities for those takedowns.
Yeah.
Now, I think he could have more success against somebody like Curtis Blades, who, while an excellent wrestler, is still kind of a work in progress as a striker. He's getting better, and he's a good thinker, and he's increasingly good at drawing you into position for his takedowns. But I think there's still enough of a gap there in terms of raw striking skill that he could trouble somebody like Blades. Mm-hmm. Now, Miocic, I think that fight is, Miocic by ground and pound finish late in the second or early in the third.
Yeah, and especially when you consider that one of the reasons we picked Werdum, both of us, was that we expected him to use some pressure to take Volkov out of his comfort zone. And Stipe Miocic does kind of know how to pressure. he kind of goes insanely aggressive when he pressures. I don't see Volkov really dealing with any aspect of Miocic's game all that comfortably. So, impressive win, nice work. The right uppercut from Volkov, a shot to look out for. It's easily his most dangerous punch, and it was the shot that put Werdum away. I think we'll see some more good things out of him, but Miocic, DC. I don't know. The future is a mystery to me, just as it was last week, Pat, because now it's time. It's time to talk about the co-main event, a.k.a. the People's Main Event, or as I said on Twitter, the parentheses, depressed People's Main Event. Wyman versus Ruebusch, Blachowicz versus Manoa. For me, Pat, I knew in my bones that Blachowicz was going to do this when he walked out to theme music from The Witcher 3. I knew then and there that there was no way this man could lose. He was all hopped up on Witcher potions. His genes were crazily mutated. Polish power was going to get the job done, and indeed, it did. What did you make of the fight?
So you were right about Blachowicz's output, and I think Manoa is also kind of shot physically. Like, that kind of wild explosiveness that he used to have is still there in flashes, but like, he's so much heavier on his feet and so much more predictable with his timing. Like, his speed and power are not shocking enough at this point. And his power is also not like snappy power, it's athletic power. So if he's not throwing himself and exploding into those shots, they don't have the pop.
Yeah. Without the speed, without the explosion, the power is not really there.
Yeah, like, we talked about that with John Dodson, for Dodson Munoz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I did point out Manoa's age last week. I was thinking that it might be maybe he's slowing down in some ways. I don't know if I thought he looked badly depleted in this matchup. He definitely he wore down. I think a lot of it did have to do with some good fortune as well as some good accuracy on Blachowicz's part. I think he broke Manoa's nose with that first knockdown in the early going, and that helped Manoa to slow down. I jokingly said online that the trick to Jan Blachowicz' career from this point forward is to break the other guy's nose in the first round, so he also gets really tired really quickly. And then he can just fight at an exhausted, slow pace and win. And it worked pretty nicely. But really, Pat, this was Rockhold Bisping all over again, just a much, much less interesting version. And
happening in slow motion,
yeah.
The slowest of motions.
Yeah. Although it did turn out to be a better fight because it lasted longer. But really, like, it was the technique of Jan Blachowicz that saved him here. It was I think a better grasp of the fundamentals of boxing. He said it himself after the win, my boxing was better than his. I think that's kind of the long and short of how Blachowicz won this fight. He had a jab that he did not need to load up to throw. It allowed him to measure the distance. It allowed him to interrupt. It allowed him to set up combinations. And he was countering in layers. He was countering with 2, 3, 4 punches at a time regularly and mixing up the angles of those counters. He did a couple of he did one of Ross Pearson's favorite moves where he would miss with the right uppercut counter, and as the other guy backed away, this being MMA, everybody backs away. They don't stay in the pocket. He would follow up with a left straight or a left cross rather than a left hook to account for the distance. That was very sneaky. He caught Manoa on the way out a few times with that. I don't know, man. Nice showing from Jan Blachowicz. Yeah. Is he actually good?
This was the kind of... I don't think he's actually good. I think he is at the very top end of perfectly fine. What pushed Jimmy Manoa briefly into actually good territory was his physicality. Sure. And now that his physicality has declined, he is drifting back downward into perfectly fine territory.
Do you think it was physicality declining that made the biggest difference between their first fight and this one?
I do, yeah. Because I think even an injured Jimmy Manoa in their first fight was so strong, like raw strong, had so much raw physical horsepower that he could just pin a guy with probably better technique in the clinch against the fence and kind of go to town.
Let me float this idea to you. Jimmy Manoa's knee injury low-key saved him in the first fight by forcing him to clinch Blachowicz so that he didn't get countered in open exchanges.
I will say no, and I'll tell you why. Because the 2015 version of Jan Blachowicz was nowhere near this good at countering.
Yeah. That's the problem. The problem with Blachowicz up to this point is that he's always been a counterpuncher, but he's been caught in this damnable conundrum, which is that he was either too reluctant to counter or, more likely, afraid of gassing out, because he either would exchange early and get really, really tired really fast, or he would be so reluctant to exchange, knowing what would happen if he did, that he just, it would be like the first Manoa fight. He wouldn't get anything done. It's like, I don't know. I think there's definitely some kind of physical decline for Manoa, undeniably, 38 years old, but I think you got to give some credit to the technical and strategic improvements of Jan Blachowicz, having a style now that works better to win fights and not just land like, not to disparage him, but like lucky shots like the one that he knocked Ilir Latifi out with. He has a fight-winning style now that will actually work only because he fights at 205 in the UFC. But that's okay. Standards are different for this division than they are for the others, right? They gotta be. They gotta be, or else we wouldn't watch any of these fucking fights.
Yeah, I mean, I am sold on Blachowicz being a kind of a top 8 light heavyweight for the foreseeable future in this division. You can draw your own conclusions as to what that says about this division and about Blachowicz. I think Blachowicz strikes me as one of these guys who, as his career goes on, is maximizing his talent to the greatest degree possible. Like, you were right that this is a guy who continues to get better basically every time we see him. Yeah. He's got slow-ass feet. His gas tank is always going to be shitty, but he's got quick hands. He's got good timing. He is making the most of his chances out there, which is allowing him to beat guys like Jimmy Manoa. And frankly, the really kind of weird part about this, and given the landscape of that division, is that could carry him into about the top 3, because that's the division that we're in here.
He asked for a matchup with Shogun, who, let us remember, is ranked number 5 in this division right now. And that's a winnable fucking matchup for Jan Blachowicz. I think so.
I would pick Blachowicz in that fight.
Yeah.
At this point. I would pick him over... I don't know. Would I pick him over Glover Teixeira? Probably not, because I think Glover's takedown game and grappling will be the last thing to go, and I think that would still do it. But I would pick him over Latifi again, probably. I would pick him over Shogun.
Definitely. If he could wrestle, definitely over Gustafsson.
He'd have a great fight with Volkan Oezdemir, I think.
Oh, yeah. I would love to see that matchup. Absolutely.
I would probably pick Oezdemir, but I think that would be a close fight. I would watch that.
Yeah, I mean, it is like there's a reason I was reminded immediately of the Bisping fight. It's not just the sense of smug satisfaction I felt watching it unfold. And
really, it's not that?
It's not just that. It's partly that. Partly the fact that both times I was sitting in a coffee shop looking like a maniac, just giggling to myself in public, watching both Fight Pass cards, weren't they? Or was I?
No,
I streamed
the second
Bisping
one was
Rockhold.
a pay-per-view.
Yeah. That's why I was watching it on my laptop. But no, the thing that makes me think of Bisping again is like we have a fairly unathletic guy in Jan Blachowicz, more so than Bisping in a lot of ways, who beat a better athlete by virtue of having a better grasp of technique, having more depth to his striking arsenal. The jab saved Jan Blachowicz because both guys got really, really tired, and Blachowicz was the guy who had a punch that didn't require energy to keep working. And Manuwa, as he always has, even as his own jab has slowly improved in recent years, he still treats everything he throws like a power punch. Like everything's meant to land hard and clean and do damage. Blachowicz carried himself through a very rough third round after Manuwa seemed to be rallying a serious comeback in the second round just because he had a nice, efficient jab. And, he knew how to rely on it, to look busier than he was, to conserve his energy and win the safe way in an otherwise very exciting fight. And the takedowns, too. They were dog shit takedowns, Pat. They were very, very bad. But Jan Blachowicz did, strong comparisons here between men's light heavyweight and women's bantamweight, but the same kind of shit that Holly Holm did against Ronda Rousey, closing the distance on his own terms. That was, I think, a big part of stopping Manuwa's pressure and frustrating him because Manuwa was loading up looking for big bombs. If Blachowicz had not been capable of changing levels even badly and going for a very ugly takedown, he might have ended up on the wrong end of those punches. So I just thought a very nice veteran performance from Blachowicz. I respect the shit out of these kind of performances, but you know that already, as does everyone who's ever listened to me talk about middleweights or other PF fighters. But Jan Blachowicz is actually good. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to look into the rest of this card, or at least the fights that interest us, which mainly means the fights we talked about last week. We've got Tom Duquesnoy, the Fire Kid. He fought Tyrion Ware and went to a controversial unanimous decision. We'll talk about that as well as the matchup and what it says about both guys' careers. Leon Edwards took a last-second TKO win over Peter Sobota, one of two literally last-second finishes on this card, which I think that's the first time that's ever happened in UFC history. And then later on, we're going to be talking about the other one of those quick finishes that happened between Paul Craig and Magomed Ankalaev, in addition to our other prospect pick for this card, Hakeem Dawodu, who suffered a shocking and very fast defeat to the hands of Danny Henry. All of that after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's continue on with the rest of this main card, the main card of UFC London, that is. Pat, before we do that, it does strike me that some people are going to be disappointed because I think I was supposed to try to rake you over the coals, but you know what happened is I got about an hour and a half surrounding that matchup of fun, childlike, giddy joy because it was so. And then I tried to tell somebody else about it, about why it was funny, and I got about 5 words in to this story. I'm like, okay, so there's this fighter who kind of sucks, and that's where I hit the point where I'm like, wait a minute, I don't care about this anymore.
You basically described the experience of everything on the internet.
Yeah,
that's the experience of trying to explain anything from the internet to somebody who is not extremely online.
Yeah, so there's this thing and it sucks, and then it's like, oh, whoa, this isn't going to translate, and now I realize I shouldn't care either.
It's the old problem of nobody cares about your fantasy team. Nobody cares about online arguments that you win, even in podcast format.
Oh, yeah.
But you did win. You were right, and I was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my wrongness.
I'm over it, man. I'm over it.
Motherfucker, I'm not.
Well, I appreciate the
I joke. I kid.
Conciliatory nature. But what's that quote from Sonny? It's like bad fights are like what is it? Bad fights are like photographs. You know, unless I'm in them or somebody's having sex, I don't care. That's basically it. That's it. Nobody else. Nobody has any reason to care about Blachowicz Manoa, and now neither do we. It's over.
Funny, is like you think about this is going to be the last thing I say about Blachowicz Manoa. Is it goes to show how jaded we are as fans of fighting.
Yeah,
I think that like 6 or 7 years ago, that is the fight of the night. That's the fight of the month. That's like a kind of a dark horse fight of the year candidate.
Yeah.
Now that was kind of a sloppy fight on a card nobody cares about between two guys who are not as good as the numbers next to their names might indicate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really, well, jadedness is just a matter of, it's a result of perspective and experience, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's kind of, I think we fail to appreciate, and this is something we talked about last week in that last segment on fights that stand the test of time. I think we fail to appreciate just how good the baseline level of fighting we get to see on basically every UFC card is now.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah, it's also good. But I don't blame us for sometimes failing to appreciate that. Like there's only one reaction you can have when you see enough like perfectly adequate stuff, which is you need to see something better than adequate to get the same feeling you used to have watching the adequate shit.
We watched 457 perfectly fine UFC fights, UFC fights last year. If you're putting on 457 fights, like it's hard for any one of them to stand out. Yeah. But
no doubt. Well, it's over.
It all comes back to oversaturation. It always comes back to that.
Always. It always comes back to our goddamned fatigue. And yes, if I sound tired, it's the UFC's fault. It's not because I stayed up till 4 a.m. playing Crusader Kings 2. So let's talk about Tom Duquesnoy, Pat. Tom Duquesnoy fought Terrion Ware on this card. We both sort of looked at it as a getting back on track fight. I still sort of see it that way, even though it was very closely contested. I think we all knew that Ware had the stuff to make Duquesnoy work for it, but it was very closely contested. I think we saw some issues that will have kind of revealed themselves to be persistent ones for Duquesnoy, but I still was not totally dissatisfied with this performance from him. I didn't feel like he made no progress whatsoever. This was essentially Duquesnoy's equivalent for me. I thought this was Duquesnoy's equivalent of Curtis Blades versus Daniel Omielanchuk, a fight in which nobody thinks the guy looks good, but if you watched this fight before, there are things you can pick out and say, I can tell he's been working on this. It's just not quite ready yet.
Yeah, the big things here, defense. That had been such a huge and kind of increasing problem for Duquesnoy going back to probably his last 5 or 6 fights. Was like he just kind of seemed to realize that he could blow out guys that he was fighting on talent and output and power, and that he stopped kind of worrying about getting hit back. And we saw that play out in the Stamann fight where he just was like, he did not expect Stamann to counter him, where he's like, oh, if I get countered, whatever, I'll hit him harder. And like, that's not sustainable in a division that's as packed with talent as bantamweight is, you know? Mm-hmm. Like maybe you could probably roll like that for a while at light heavyweight or even maybe middleweight in the UFC. But bantamweight at this point is probably the second most talented division in the UFC. Yeah. If you fight that way, guys are going to hit you more and harder than you hit them.
Yeah.
And and what was really striking to me was the landed strike numbers in this fight are really, really misleading. Where they're going to tell you, as I pull this up here, that Ware landed 60 shots to Duquesnoy's head over the course of this fight. That very, very few of those landed anything like cleanly.
Yeah,
they landed at the end of the arc. They landed as glancing shots. They bounced off Duquesnoy's gloves first. They kind of grazed his face. Like 60 landed headshots makes it sound like Ware put a beating on him. Ware struggled to catch Duquesnoy with anything to the head that left any sort of telling mark at all.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of pawing and touching behind those shots to the head. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that Duquesnoy essentially forced Ware or restricted Ware to only landing big, powerful, clean punches to the body, which, like, nothing wrong with that. You're moving your head better than you did in your last fight, better than you have in your last several fights. Your body's still going to be there. And there were still some of those, plenty of those persistent Duquesnoy problems. Like, we have talked before about him sort of admiring his work, so to speak. And he still does a bit of that. I think with him, it's when he sort of just pauses and looks at his opponent, looks at what he's just done. I think it's like a pressure fighter thing, where he's kind of looking like, where do I have to go next? Where is he retreating to? I'm okay to stand in position because he's reacting to the cool shit that I just did to him, rather than what might be coming back at me. How might he be responding? But he was responding very well defensively to Ware's leads. He did a nice job of slipping and countering with quite a few good left hooks, up to the volume on his low kicks, which have always been a vital part of his game. His low kicks were a massive part of his success early on in his Bama days. And that pawing jab, it was only there in brief glimmers. It's definitely a new tool because the one thing that I wanted to pick out something very simple after Duquesnoy's fight with Patrick Williams. I wanted to pick out something very, very simple that I would like to have seen him improve in that matchup, and I asked for a pawing jab. I was like, okay, he had this problem. Williams wasn't supposed to hurt him, and he did. And I think it's because Duquesnoy just felt that he could just walk forward. He threw up his guard. He walked forward. He didn't have anything to throw off the rhythm of the guy he was approaching. He didn't have anything to tell himself how much farther he had to go. He didn't have anything to set himself up for that pressure in any way, to lead into that pressure. And in this fight, the first bell rang, the first round began, and Duquesnoy came out and started flashing his left hand in Tyrion Ware's face. It didn't last the whole fight. It only came back in little moments, as I said. But yeah, like, that's a sign of improvement to me. I thought that I saw things here that maybe you wouldn't appreciate if you were just looking at this fight isolated and noticing that Ware is not highly regarded, and yet it was extremely close, which it was. It was a very close fight. How did you score it, by the way, Pat?
I had it 29-28 Duquesnoy. I thought he took the first and second.
Yeah, watching it live, I scored all three. I know that's the most controversial way to score this, though one judge did also give all 3 rounds to Duquesnoy. The second round I remember being very, very close, and I would have no issue. I would almost even expect myself to score that one the other way if I were to rewatch it, which I haven't done with scoring in mind yet. But I don't feel like, I don't know, I feel like people got very, it's MMA and it's online MMA, so people tend to react like things are robberies all the time. But it was a very close fight. It was very competitive throughout. I didn't feel like whether one guy pulled ahead or not kind of depends on what you like. And what I like in whether it's boxing or MMA, if I'm looking at mostly striking exchanges, I like clean, telling blows. And I thought that Duquesnoy landed just more of those. And that's why I gave it to him.
I think the thing for me, this does, I think, bode real well for Duquesnoy's future because it shows that he can mix it up and that he's got different tools in his bag. He's got different approaches. Duquesnoy has never been a stick and move out fighter before.
Yeah.
That has never really been his game. There were a lot of times early in his career when he kind of liked to be in the middle of the cage and he liked to stand his ground and kind of plant and throw combinations and kind of dart in and out, but not with guys putting pressure on him. It was just he would kind of be moving around because he was the faster guy and it made sense to do that. But he was really kind of a boxer puncher. In his last few fights, he's been more of a pressure fighter. He's wanted to be moving forward and dictating. Here, the fact that he could play a kind of an effective stick and move game against a really solid pressure fighter, that to me bodes well for his versatility. That these may be things that don't pay off right now, but I think this kind of versatility, once he gets more depth of skill down the road, is going to pay off in big ways. The fact that he can kind of switch up his approach mentally, that speaks a lot to me about what he can do. I saw some things or heard some things going around like, well, he should have finished Ware. Why didn't those low kicks tell more? It's because Tyrion Ware is unbelievably tough. Like, it's far more likely that if you have to choose kind of an Occam's razor explanation for why Tom Duquesnoy, a guy who's finished almost everybody that he's fought in his recent run up to now, didn't make those shots tell against Tyrion Ware, is it either that or the fact that Ware is just unbelievably durable? Ware, who survived 3 rounds with Sean O'Malley, who almost murdered Andre Sukumtat before his leg got destroyed in his last fight. It's far more likely that Ware is just unbelievably tough than that Duquesnoy's got nothing on his shots.
Yeah. I'd say a little of column A, because Duquesnoy was plying a very different trade in this fight. I think you could explain, the fact that he wasn't marching somebody down and constantly smashing them with elbows over the top and everything. That also explains why he wasn't like putting Ware away with ease. That he wasn't fighting the typical Tom Duquesnoy come forward fight. But
he wasn't trying to blow him away. And because I think he knew that if he tried to blow him away, he was going to get ground down and lose in the 3rd round. Yeah.
And let's talk about that. I did still get the impression that Duquesnoy gassed a little bit. And it's sort of the feeling now, at least in like MMA Twitter, is that maybe that's a consistent issue that Duquesnoy is not going to be able to get away from. That he comes out too hard early, or maybe despite the fact that he doesn't look big for the division, the weight cut is just particularly hard for him. Maybe it's the way he cuts the weight. But are you a little worried about Duquesnoy? Does that kind of change his prospect status in your eyes going forward? And do you think that is an issue that he'll continue to have?
I don't think he really gassed that much. I think it was a fight that was contested at a high pace. I think he had to do a lot of moving. He threw a lot of kicks, which are energy-intensive strikes.
Yeah.
And Ware's pressure was just relentless. Like, Duquesnoy had to do a lot to avoid that. We'll know a lot more, I think, from one more fight. In the past, Duquesnoy has, like on the regionals, that did not seem to be a problem. Is it going to be in the UFC? Maybe, but I don't know. Dan Hardy was talking a lot on the commentary about how he thinks Duquesnoy is going to grow up to be a 145er. I think that bantamweight is the right weight class for him.
He's so small for 145. Like, if that is the truth, if that's where he feels most comfortable and it really does hamper him to make 135, then he is in a terrible Rich Franklin-esque predicament. Because he looked like, even in his fights on the British regional circuit, he looked tiny compared to the other featherweights he was fighting.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. This is the right weight class for him. You may be right. It may be a weight cutting thing. It may be a conditioning thing. It may be just that his style is energy intensive and he's going to need to learn to make that work. That's just entirely
an experience
possible.
Thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys that's true of, especially when you're 22 years old, fighting a guy who's kind of overmatched on the regional scene. You're not cutting any weight to make 145. You've got all the talent in the world. You can just fight forever at that pace, and you kind of get used to fighting forever at that pace. And then you move to the UFC. You've got to start cutting down a little bit. You're getting a little bit older. You're throwing harder. You're throwing your shots with more behind them, which takes more energy. Like, I think there's something to be said for the idea of just kind of calming down into a sustainable style, and against guys who are doing more to you.
Yeah, no doubt. It's not so much the Duquesnoy's own pace being a problem. I mean, I think he does fight at a very fast pace, but it's also the resistance coming back is a factor in how difficult it is to maintain that pace. When you're on the regional circuit and just blowing guys out, yeah, you can sprint for days if there's no pressure on you. Some people can anyway. I'm not saying I could. But Tom Duquesnoy now is like, he's not getting the chance to just sprint ahead and hold on to that lead until it's over. He is fighting people who resist and make him work, and that wears you out.
He also, it should be noted, has fought in his last 2 fights 2 guys who are known for pushing an exceptionally quick pace.
True.
Like, Tyrion Ware throws on average about 16 strikes a minute over his 3 UFC fights. That's a lot. That's a lot of strikes to throw in 3 UFC fights. And Cody Stamann averages throwing like 11 or 12, and that's with a ton of wrestling involved. Cody Stamann is also an exceptionally quick-paced fighter. So I think as he kind of settles in at a little higher in this division, I think he's going to run into fewer guys who kind of spam volume the way those two do. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe.
I'll disagree slightly. Like, I do think, I think you could say that in some ways Ware did Duquesnoy some favors. There was an opportunity in this fight, I think, for Ware to turn up the volume in the later round and go pursue his shots aggressively, which Stamen did a better job of, even throwing fewer shots than Ware. I think Ware does sometimes have a hard time, like, committing to stepping into come forward shots.
And Ware threw 23 shots a minute in the third round.
Oh yeah, he definitely was throwing. He just wasn't really he wasn't closing the distance. He wasn't stepping in and being assertive with those shots. If Duquesnoy was slowing down, Ware didn't exactly make him deal with that.
But it's not like Ware didn't throw.
Oh, no.
Is my whole point. It's like Ware was throwing. Ware was throwing a lot. And he was throwing in a way that, like, very few guys in the UFC are going to push that kind of pace on a guy like Tom Duquesnoy. If you look at the top 15 of that bantamweight division, guys like Eddie Wineland in there. Eddie Wineland is not going to throw 25 strikes a minute. Tomas Almeida might, but probably not at this point in his career. He's slowed down quite a bit. Rob Font, not a tremendously high volume striker. You got guys like John Dodson, who's not a tremendously high volume striker. Bantamweight's actually a little weird in that a lot of the very good strikers in that division are not spam volume types.
They're low volume power punchers.
Yeah, strangely enough.
A very weird thing at 135. Yeah.
Whereas at featherweight, you have a lot of guys who like to push a really fast pace.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I can leave it at saying, like, I thought it looked like a learning experience fight for Duquesnoy. He didn't look as great as I expected him or hoped that he might look. But I also don't think he looked as bad as I suspect a lot of other people are thinking he did. I think
this is a fight that you'll look back on and be like, in a couple of years and see flashes of some of the things that Duquesnoy gets really good at.
With the benefit of context, you'd be like, okay, I see what he was doing. I see what he was working on in that time. Yeah, I think so. Speaking of one more fight, by the way, Terrion Ware, can he stick around? Because he's a lot of fun. And he deserves, like, a break. Like, give him a debuting fighter that you're really not sure about. Somebody who, like, got a lucky quote unquote win on Contender Series and be like, okay, let Terrion Ware beat this guy. Cause, he had to fight Sean O'Malley and Cody Stamen and Tom Duquesnoy. And he was competitive with all of them, more competitive with all of them than most of their opponents are by far. So he's good. He should stick around.
Yeah. Why can he fight I'm told that this is a person who just signed, Liu Pingyuan.
I think he should probably thrash Liu Pingyuan. And that's exactly what I want to see out of Terrion Ware next.
Yeah. We know what's going to happen here, right? They're going to put him in there against our boy Peter Yan.
Oh, or they're going to cut him. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those two.
They're going to cut him right away because that's 3 losses in a row. Or if they do keep him around, they're going to throw him in there against one of the other insanely talented prospects in this fucking division. But I hope he gets a break.
Isn't Peter Yan supposed to debut in the UFC soon?
Yeah, he was scheduled for a card a few cards ago and then pulled out for some reason. I don't recall the reason. But yeah, they'll probably make Terrion Ware fight him next because they hate Terrion Ware. They hate him as much as I love him. But please keep my always on sparring mode journeyman, looks like he only spars for training boxer type in the UFC because he's fun, man. Give him some credit for these fights.
Yeah, I want to see Peter Yan fight. Speaking of hyper-talented bantamweight prospects.
Yeah, well, speaking of hyper-talented prospects. Oh, wait, no, it's not time for Devoto and Ankalaev just yet. Let's spare a few words real quick. Leon Edwards beat Peter Sobota. I did not understand while watching this fight. I mean, it wasn't a slobber knocker. It wasn't Blachowicz Manua for sure. But I was a little confused watching this at how subdued the London crowd was, because I thought this was quite a good fight. Technical, back and forth, very interesting, some fun exchanges, some big shots landed, and a very late finish. I had very little to complain about here. It was kind of everything I wanted out of this matchup, and both guys tested each other exactly how I thought they would. But But then I went and watched the prelims after watching the main card, and I kind of got it because, as you will understand, when we talk about Devoto and Ankalaev's fights after talking about this one. Did you agree? Did you think it was a good fight, Pat?
I think it was more or less the fight I expected, which is to say no.
You didn't enjoy this one?
I thought it was fine, but I think it was fine as a way of describing a lot of what Leon Edwards does in the cage at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know. I remain tremendously unsold on him. I've been racking my brain trying to think of an equivalent kind of fighter to Edwards, a guy who's billed as a striker and then realizes that, hey, you know what? I'm a pretty good wrestler and grappler. I've got kind of a feel for this. And maybe my striking isn't quite as good as I thought it was, or maybe a lot of the guys I'm fighting are kind of a rough matchup for me in some very particular way. So I'm just going to lean on the striking, or on the wrestling and the grappling bits of it. Because it turns out he's actually a pretty goddamn good wrestler and grappler.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, but I think ironically that lowers his ceiling in this division. Because I think
he's not a specialist anymore.
Yeah. And when you get up there, because he's now basically in line for kind of a top 10 matchup, right? He's in line for the Santiago Ponzinibbio's and Darren Till's and
called out the fucking Scouser. Oh, that was my worst attempt at a Scouse accent yet.
Yeah. I mean, he's like, unless he lands a kind of a knockout shot on somebody like Darren Till, kind of a slick counter or something like that, I don't think he's going to out wrestle that dude. Because I don't think he can get close enough to work those takedowns. He's not going to out wrestle Colby Covington. He's probably not going to out wrestle Santiago Ponzinibbio. So where does that leave him? It leaves him on the outside looking in, unless he can kind of ramp up his striking again, which is not out of the question. But I just think matchups like this against guys like Peter Sobota, when you win them this way, it says the positive way to look at it is, well, he won the fight. He managed to find his kind of entry point into a winning game plan, and he stuck with it, and that's great. He won the fight. The other way is to say this is one fight in a much longer stretch that's going to tell us a lot about who and what Leon Edwards is in this division. Yeah. And to me, this did not say awesome things about that. I like him as a fighter, and I want him to be kind of different. I don't know, like maybe that's just weird and selfish as an observer.
It's a bizarre, sort of frustrating way of fighting. Watching Leon Edwards, it's like he's teasing so many different things, because that's kind of how well-roundedness feels nowadays, where I think we're so used to specialists. There are very few fighters who get by on the fact that they can do everything pretty well anymore. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not the metagame approach. The approach now is like, you pick one thing you're really good at and you force the other guy to play that game. And Leon Edwards has like a couple games that he can play back and forth, and they're maybe not super well connected, but he's pretty good at both of them. And I don't know. He's kind of like, Leon Edwards to me is like if you took Rory McDonald and you gave him just enough athletic ability where he didn't have to be a crazy obsessive about like covering every technical aspect of how MMA works. And then you'd get Leon Edwards, where he's like clearly faster and more athletic in all the ways we usually talk about than somebody like Rory Mack, but also kind of lacks that putting it all together feel where it's really cohesive. But I'll say this. I'm really interested in a fight between Leon Edwards and Darren Till. First of all, I love the call out. Leon Edwards putting his name out there like he should. Darren Till no-sold it, but that's a matchup I would like to see. I have questions about both of these guys still, and I kind of think both of them could answer those questions for each other. I don't know how Leon Edwards deals with somebody who, is long and tall and wants to strike with him and who is not easy to take down, both because of defensive wrestling ability and because of that reach. But I also don't know like how Darren Till deals with somebody who can be elusive and not get beaten up and still be there when the 4th and 5th round roll around. Because Darren Till cuts a shitload of weight to make 170, and we have seen him slow down before. In fact, in almost every fight I think he notably slows down and starts breathing hard because he throws everything pretty hard and fast and doesn't really rein it in. He feels like he's in control and he just lets it loose. And I think Leon Edwards is like a well-rounder who's a slick enough striker to not get caught out early, is like the type of fighter who can test that aspect of Darren Till's game. So I am interested in that matchup. I think that's what you do with guys like this. So you're like, I don't know how this style works exactly, so let's just kind of mash the two together and see what it tells us.
Yeah, I would be reasonably intrigued by that. I tend to think that Edwards is hittable enough that Till would catch him with something big in that fight, but it's a fight I would not be averse to seeing it. I don't think that's what they're going to do with Till because they want to give him somebody who can and will talk with him. Yeah. Right? Like it's kind of a weird spot promotionally because they need Till to be something.
They'll give him Covington. I mean, Till Covington would be a war of words, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, fucking Colby Covington, man. Like, I see a good friend of the show, Phil McKenzie, had a really perceptive point about Colby Covington on Twitter the other day that I think bears repeating, which is that Colby Covington wants to do the whole Chael and Conor McGregor thing. The difference is Chael and Conor McGregor were self-aware about it and included just enough kind of like interesting stuff. They said things that occasionally intrigued you amidst like the constant troll banter. That you kind of wondered what was real and what wasn't. With Colby Covington, you're not wondering anything. He's just a douchebag and an asshole. And there's no wondering there. There's no like, give me like maybe buried amidst these nuggets of shit is something that's worth hearing. No, it's just all shit. Everything he says is shit because he's shit. And so there's like, that's if that's going to be your shtick to just be like rolling in shit because that's what you are, then I guess go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, become the golden turd you were always meant to be. I don't know. Part of me, Pat, part of me is still the little kid who would like, if at a school dance the sound system failed and the whole dance was ruined, I would snicker and laugh. Part of me is that kid still, so part of me does enjoy Colby Covington because of the reaction he gets out of MMA fans. Like, I just don't take it that seriously, but listening to him talk, it is like, fuck you for making me think, boy, I miss how charming Chael Sonnen used to be. Because that is really the difference. It's like, it is like Chael Sonnen without the charm. And if you can't be as charming as the reptilian Chael Sonnen, then, I don't know. It's not a great look.
Let me tell you this. As somebody who has met in person some of MMA's great trash talkers, they have something that Colby Covington does not, which is charisma. Yeah. And like if you're a charismatic person, you can get away with insulting somebody to their face. You can draw that ire out of them. Like the key to understanding like the appeal of guys like Chael and Conor McGregor and Bisping and whatnot is that it isn't just a constant stream of shit. Yeah. There's like, or if they are in constant stream of shit mode, there's some cleverness and interest there. Like, and the things that they're saying are outlandish in a way that's not just like that, that there's a game being played. Whereas with Covington, it's just shit. It's just all shit. I don't have another word for it. It's just shit.
Chael Sonnen is Ghostbusters. All the lines have room to breathe. Everything's in its proper place. Colby Covington is Ghostbusters 2016. Like, just stop. Please stop. Stop. Everybody stop talking. Stop improvising.
Just a massive. He is the CGI. He's just CGI shit. He's like just a massive computer-generated batch of feces.
They should have gotten him for
an alcoholic wrestler.
They should have gotten him for the emoji movie. He could have done the poop emoji. CGI shit right there.
Jesus Christ. Anyway, okay, so we need to talk real quick about Akeem Devoto and Magomed Ankalaev.
Yeah. This is your fault, Pat. You were excited about both these guys. You suggested we talk about them. They both lost. Turns out they both suck. Standard. So what do you have to say for yourself and for these idiot fighters that you thought were going to be good?
So first order of business, shout out to friend of the show, Mookie Alexander, for for coming up with the idea of the Heavy Hands Prospect Graveyard, wherein we put basically every young fighter that we tout on this show because they never turn out to be any good.
Yeah, and I believe it was James Kimball on Twitter who suggested this in response. Yeah, in response to Mookie's tweet. But imagine wrought iron gate over this graveyard, and it says Heavy Hearts. That's the Heavy Hands Cemetery, the Prospect Cemetery.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, kind of the upshot here is these are both classic, though very different, prospect submission losses, which is a category of prospect loss that I've talked about many, many times over the years. And in fact, I think I should fucking trademark it. But there are a couple of different ways for this to go about happening. The Akeem Devoto one, but they all share a lot of similarities. And it's basically that you have a hot prospect who's drastically more athletic and physically gifted than their opponent, who, for reasons of either hubris or kind of lack of focus in a moment, just get caught in a submission by a big, strong, talented submission grappler. That happened to Tom Duquesnoy. His first pro loss was to Makwan Amirkhani, a giant submission grappler at 145 pounds. Yep. Conor McGregor's two early career submission losses were both to like these big, strong, crafty submission specialists. George St. Pierre versus Matt Hughes. Jose Aldo to Luciano Azevedo, if memory serves correctly. These are just all over the place, these kinds of prospect submission losses.
Sage Northcutt, of course.
Yeah, well, or he just can't grapple.
Yeah, well, it's still though fits the mold. Yeah. The Brian Barberena fight fits the mold.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. These prospect submission losses are everywhere. Once you start looking down the careers of talented fighters, you see them all over the place. Yeah, they're just everywhere there. So the upshot is. But there are different types of prospect submission loss, and we got to see both of them on this card, yep. which is my favorite thing ever. You had the either knockdown or early panic submission loss. So Devoto got Aaron Pico'd, where he just got clocked with a punch that he didn't really see coming, knocked down, and then the enormous submission grappler locked him up in a choke, adjusted, and managed to get there. As the prospect, with his head kind of smashed and fuzzy from the knockdown, tried to athlete his way out of it.
Yep.
Which is exactly how Conor McGregor got both knee barred and arm triangled by Joe Duffy and Artemis Sitnikov, if memory serves.
Good memory, if you did indeed just remember that.
Yeah, but same deal, but Ankalaev got the other one where he got so comfortable just beating the shit out of the guy that he kind of forgot that the other guy also knew how to do submissions.
Yeah, both were, you contrasted this earlier before we began recording with the other kind of prospect loss we frequently talk about, which is when we see a prospect kind of doing well and then run out of ideas, and they just sort of like, where do I go from here? Like, they didn't have the experience to keep the rhythm interesting and keep it flowing for the duration of the fight, and so they allow the other guy to work their way back into it. In this one, despite the fact that one of these it felt almost instantaneous, the Devoto loss, and one of them was one of two 4-minute, 59-second round 3 finishes on the card. They both, I kind of easily sum both of them up in my head as they just didn't respect the guy they were fighting all that much. They didn't respect the threat of what might be coming back at them, and now they will. And that's why we need these prospect losses. Akeem Devoto tried to come out, didn't think he was going to be there to be hit, didn't think somebody else could come out looking for his chin as hard as he was for the other guys, and tried to counter a right hand with a left hook inside, which is a great move, but like a shoulder roll, not the kind of thing you would try on the first right hand that's thrown at you. A move that kind of relies on you having the timing and the tempo and the rhythm of the combinations coming at you, because if you miss badly and you get hit clean. That's what happened. And then, I can't really blame him for that. Like, it's a lesson he had to learn, and he did here. Nor can I really blame Magomed Ankalaev for, not really respecting the guard of Paul Craig when his head was smashed up against the fence and it seemed like he had no space for his hips to even get into triangle position, and then getting triangled. that's something you learn as an up and comer. Like, you got to look out for that shit all the time. And now they know.
Yeah. And the thing about the prospect submission losses is that very rarely do they point to kind of a long-term pattern of like, this guy is just shit at this, or like the Sage Northcutt thing where he keeps not knowing how to grapple is pretty rare.
They're not all like, Sage Northcutt.
Yeah. When you talk about fighters who have kind of extreme talent, who are kind of at this very upper end of talent, like, they very rarely make the same mistakes twice. In McGregor's case is a little bit different, because what that speaks to is his underlying tendency to panic when things aren't going his way, that has been very difficult for him to kind of get over the years. Like, it speaks to kind of a deeper personality thing that we've seen enough of him to know exists. Whereas with most fighters, it's just like, oh, I got caught in kind of a weird thing for X, Y, or Z easy reason that doesn't necessarily speak to some huge underlying facet of your personality.
Yeah. Yeah. Both remarkable results, totally unexpected. Paul Craig with the fucking comeback of the year so far, no doubt.
That was wild, man.
Yeah, and then just after that, Danny Roberts absolutely murdered Oliver Enkamp with a wide left hand right to the chin. So violent prelims sort of explained for me some of the subdued reaction to what I thought were pretty quality fights on the main card, and that's about it for UFC London. Unless you have anything else you'd like to say about it, Pat.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
All right. Then it's gone. It's behind us. Never shall it return. We'll never say the words Jimmy Manuwa or Jan Blachowicz ever again until the rubber match, of course, which now we do need to see. So let's take one more break. When we come back, we are going to get into some questions from our listeners, and then we'll wrap up. See you after the break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. UFC London is in the past. Ahead of us, questions from our listeners. These are 2 questions from our Patreon contributors. If you would like your questions answered on this show, you should check us out on Patreon. Heavy Hands on Patreon for just $3 a month. You get access to all of our bonus content. We try to keep up with bi-monthly bonus episodes, which is with an occasional extra in there, here and there. And $5 gets you a question answered on the show on a somewhat regular rotation. And in fact, if you guys haven't had a question answered in a while and haven't submitted one in a while, those you $5 patrons out there, send those questions in, because once again, we still need more questions. But we have 2 here from our Patreon patrons. Our first question comes to us from Michael. Michael asks on Patreon, as a truly unimpressive specimen of athleticism, I assume he's talking about himself and not us, Pat and I both. Well, I don't want to drag you down with me, Pat. I'm just going to sarcastically say I'm a paragon of fitness, of course. I'm curious, he continues, in the history of MMA, who is the most successful and least gifted fighter ever? Or rather, the naturally least good great fighter? What would you say?
This is an insanely good question.
Yeah, it is, right?
It could actually be a whole segment, but I think the easy, straightforward answer is probably Michael Bisping. In terms of the guy who did the most to maximize his talent, who, despite having a number of glaring flaws, like not being especially durable in terms of being able to take a shot, in terms of not having a lot of natural power in his hands. Really, the only outstanding physical characteristic that he had, and not being especially strong, like he was never physically overpowering,
no.
Which is not necessarily the same thing as athleticism. What Bisping had going for him was kind of general overall durability in terms of not getting like tremendously injured all the time, being able to stay in the gym, and great cardio, incredible, exceptional cardio. So, but on that humble foundation, Bisping built an exceptionally successful and lucrative career for himself.
Like, yeah, and it wasn't
props to him.
I know it's very simple to paint the like, oh, the blue collar fighter versus natural talent fighter sort of dynamic, and it's not fair to say that having really great cardiovascular fitness is not a type of athletic ability, but it is also I think pretty clearly in Bisping's case, a product of him working his ass off. Bisping well known for doing a lot of road work, a lot of running, and always staying in shape, just like the Diaz brothers, who I think both of whom you could also sort of add into this category. That fitness is a product of it feels less like a product of talent and more like a product of, I mean, I guess if you break it down, you could keep subdividing, right? You could say that the mental tenacity to push that hard is in itself a kind of natural talent that some people don't have. But we're talking about innate physical athleticism, and Bisping doesn't have a lot of it in really any of the metrics we usually like to use. Yeah,
I mean, they're absolutely kind of innate capabilities that people have in terms of like cardiovascular capacity. Like there are going to be, I mean, some of those have a genetic basis, others of them have an environmental basis. Like not everybody is born with the same ability to be a distance runner or kind of an endurance athlete.
Yeah.
But with that said, everybody has limits within which they can increase those. And, there's no question that Bisping was as fit as he could possibly be.
Yeah.
Like he pushed that to the very, very, very limit. Same deal with the Diaz brothers. Like I'm sure on some level they're kind of endurance freaks, but they also put in all of the work necessary to be to maximize that. I think we mentioned a couple of other good examples. Like Bisping is the easiest answer, but he's a long, long way from being the only one. Who else comes up for you?
I'm going to hit you with a strong alternative here. You ready for this?
Okay. Yes.
Tim Sylvia.
Tim Sylvia. Okay.
Who is more profoundly untalented than Tim Sylvia? Honestly. Like, who looks more awkward, more uncoordinated, less quick? Who had worse weight issues? Like, Tim Sylvia has so much going against him that means he should not even be a professional fighter. He is like a heavyweight Cody McKenzie. And yet he was a UFC heavyweight champion and had some really credible performances behind that resume. Like you can't, you can question the quality of the UFC competition back in the day, and that's fine. But it's the heavyweight division. It always kind of sucks. And Sylvia, I think, found a way to really, really make his very limited athletic ability work for him at the elite level of MMA. I don't know.
There are jokes and memes, many of them from his teammates, about how bad he was, and yet there he found himself. So I think Sylvia, I think that's a fair shout. I also want to point to somebody we talked about a little bit earlier. I think Fabricio Werdum belongs in that conversation in terms of having maximized utterly the physical gifts that he has available to himself. Like that dude, you put him in there with guys like Cain Velasquez and Alistair Overeem. Physically speaking, he should not be competitive in those fights.
Yeah.
Like Cain Velasquez, a drastically better athlete, faster, better kind of inborn cardio,
faster, more agile, stronger,
more powerful on a shot for shot basis.
Yeah,
like
everything.
Yeah, but the fact that Werdum
and the cardio was better cardio. He had even that,
at least on paper.
Yeah,
at least on paper. Those are, I think Werdum probably belongs in that conversation as well. I'm trying to think, but Werdum was like a slightly above average athlete relative to heavyweight in his early career when he was a youthful guy, like in his late 20s. Werdum was not unathletic. He was just not a great athlete.
Yeah. It's hard when you draw the line at like the perfect balance really is Michael Bisping, where it's like Tim Sylvia is
Bisping was never unathletic. He just was not an especially good athlete relative to elite competition.
A perfectly adequate athlete, which is the bare minimum of what you generally need to compete in MMA. So like the perfect middle ground between not that talented and did a lot with it. And then Tim Sylvia, if you really want to push that untalented slider all the way to the max, he's the fighter you get if that's your metric.
I have one more shout for you here.
Yeah.
Carlos Condit.
Explain.
because I don't think Condit is especially fast. He's not an especially hard hitter on a shot-for-shot basis. He's durable and has had great cardio over the years, but I don't think he's especially gifted.
Yeah.
You know, like his gifts are largely mental and durability wise.
Yeah,
like,
it's all
and
durability.
Probably from having grown up, at 5,000 feet in Albuquerque. Like I think that plays in there, but he's not especially fast. He's not especially quick of hand or feet. Like he's not bad at those things, but he's not outstanding. The Diaz brothers too, I don't think are traditionally gifted in that sense.
Yeah.
But
Nate's kind of slow as shit, like he's very slow for a lightweight and he makes it work.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I don't think Condit's a bad shot at all. I think you have to call a chin like that some kind of innate athletic ability because there's not even a
gift. It's not an athletic one.
It's a gift for sure. And it's definitely it's one that I can't come up with any explanation for. I've always been incredibly impressed with Carlos Condit's chin because frequently when you see somebody who takes shots well, you can sort of look at, see how they're in position when they get hit. And that's never the case with Carlos Condit. Feet out of position, off balance, terrible, terrible posture. All the things that made Michael Bisping in his younger days so susceptible to being knocked down and staggered. Condit just takes shots like a fucking champ. So that is a serious innate ability that he has. But in terms of the speed, the dexterity, the movement, he's kind of awkward. He looks kind of uncoordinated. And I think you have to appreciate that the janky style of Carlos Condit kind of comes from not being that much of an athlete. And that's okay. It's part of what makes him so fun, man. It's part of what makes his style so interesting. Like all these guys. This is why, come on, Pat. You know why I love the Journeyman. I'm the guy who, we're playing the tabletop RPG. Everyone else is like, hey, I want this weapon from the book. I want this weapon. I want some fucking shit, okay? Give me a fucking cast iron pan. I want limitations to work with because then my success means something. That's why I like these guys. So that's a great question. I really enjoyed that one. Thank you, Michael, for that question. And we have one more to get to before we wrap up today. The second one comes to us from Teddy Bricker, Theodore. And Teddy asks, I would love a more in-depth breakdown of the concept of timing in striking exchanges. For example, what makes you say that X fighter has better timing than another fighter, etc.? A couple of sub-questions here. Is timing trainable? If so, how would you improve it? Let's talk about timing, Pat. What is good timing?
So I think there are a couple of different components to this, and I think some of them are kind of innate and based on your reflexes and your speed, and others can be taught in the sense that they're about anticipation. They're about reading your opponent, understanding the kind of underlying patterns to their game, reading their twitches and their body language, and doing something before they do it. Right. So it's both mental and kind of a physical thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It definitely can be trained, experience gives you timing, knowing how to read things. For example, timing defense in the pocket, using defensive head movement and footwork inside. That's based on timing. That timing is augmented usually by having enough experience to know what's probably going to come next at you 90% of the time, right? So it's a lot easier to time something if you're able to narrow down your options. If you've had enough experience with this situation to know what you're probably looking to time, it's a lot easier to time it accurately, to sense that little trigger, that little twitch that tells you that the next shot is coming. So if I slip a right hand to the outside, 90% of the time I know if another shot's coming at me, it's a left hook. And so I'm going to roll under it or I'm going to block it. And I have a couple of options that are my pre-trained responses to the hooks. So the timing is all I have to worry about. I know what's probably coming. I know how to stop it. All I have to worry about is waiting for that shot to come. And just being patient enough to wait and time it, that's something that comes with experience. So I think that's a strong example of timing being trained into a fighter. Just getting used to, anticipating in a sense. Anticipating in order to make it easier to react. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. There's some people who seem to have incredible kind of innate gifts for reading their opponent's timing,
Yeah.
but everybody can learn timing. And you can especially learn timing if you've got 8 or 12 weeks of a camp and a particular opponent and a lot of film on that opponent and training partners who can replicate it, right? Like there's a lot that you can do to figure out your opponent's timing, but there's always going to be kind of a live adjustment process. You can adjust to your timing to any fighter, no matter how fast they are, if you've got a little time and a little durability to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down to, I mean, the concept itself of good timing. It comes down to, aside from the innate reaction time, which I think is what people tend to focus on most, I think like pattern recognition is really the important thing. Again, coming down to experience, having seen these shots a lot of times before in your life and knowing what you're going to be timing, not just improvising as you're trying to time what's coming at you, knowing that there are patterns that everybody sort of falls into most of the time, does help. But being able to catch up on, being able to catch patterns, not just what shot comes after this shot, but how does the body move when this shot is going to be coming, learning to see the triggers before the punch actually flies, learning to watch the torso as it starts to turn or as the shoulder starts to pop and know that's going to be a punch, I can tell. That also, I think, just comes down to experience. Yes, reaction time helps, but just having seen that, being calm, being patient is kind of weirdly, to me, like the key of timing things. It's not over-anticipating, which I think is what everybody does. When they first learn how to defend themselves, they try one of those first sparring sessions, you want to try out your defense. At least I did when I was in that phase. And so you want to try and slip this, and so you start waiting on everything. You start over anticipating. Then you slip too soon. You give the other guy your timing. He times you and stings you. If you're just patient, if you know what your options are, you know how to respond, and you just wait for the shot to come, then I think your timing improves dramatically. If you're just calm enough to wait and not over anticipate, that to me is a sure sign of very, very good timing. But I think that's about it. So thank you, Teddy, for your question. And once again, another thank you to Michael. And that's pretty much it for this week's Heavy Hands. We hope you guys enjoyed the dramatic conclusion of the Wyman versus Ruebusch, the dramatic second chapter, if there is indeed a third Manawa versus Blachowicz. And God, I hope there is. I really hope there is. Before we wrap up, Pat, what do you have coming out this week?
I have a new episode of Tides of History, which is looking at the printing press as an information revolution in the 15th and 16th centuries. So, it's a lot like the introduction of the internet in the sense that it took a little while, but it eventually completely upended how people consumed information and what kinds of worlds they were able to build. There was 16th century fake news where you had to deal with how do you know what's true and what's not when you don't know the person who's telling you this or writing this for you? So it's an interesting topic.
Hark, the dog barks. I think that's fake news. That was how they used to measure it in the days before before Verret. That's how they measured it.
Yeah, exactly.
What about me? I don't know, Pat. Can you tell I'm tired? I played video games late last night. I watched the fight. I mean, what do you people want from me? I'm still working on the fucking boxing thing I said I was gonna have come out before this episode. I'm still working on that, so I don't know. Keep an eye out for that. I'm trying to do some shit about Dmitry Bivol. I'm trying to do a thing on Marlon Starling as well, one of my favorite defensive boxers. Everything's going slow. Nothing's quite ready yet, so I don't know. But keep an eye out and follow me on Twitter, okay? That's the best way to find out if I've published something. Keep your eyes constantly pinned to my Twitter, and it's easy to do that if you know where to find me. My handle is @BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. And you can also find Pat on Twitter @Patrick_Wyman, and you can find the both of us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/ either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Ruebusch MMA. Check out Pat's work on Deadspin when he's over there. Check out the Tides of History, and hit us up. Let us know what you think. Let us know what topics you want to have discussed, and check us out on Patreon. All right, if you like the show, support it. I think you'll enjoy our bonus content. The people who are already enjoying it seem to like it pretty well, so give it a shot. Why not? It's $3 fucking. I mean, you can hate it. Come on, guys. All right. So I'm not trying to browbeat our listeners into supporting the show financially. That's about it for us. Thank you all for tuning in. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.